London in 1986. A young group of Belgian designers shows up at this designer fair. All their designs had been crammed into a van and they decided to cross the canal in the hope of finding buyers. They achieved way more than that because soon they would be known as the Antwerp Six and their designs would be available at Barneys, Bergdorf's and Liberty of London. And this label, Antwerp Six, makes us believe that there was some type of collaboration or that they had a design process together or something like this, but actually the 6 designers pursued their careers individually. These designers were Dries Van Noten, Demeulemeester, Dirk Bikkembergs, Walter von Beirendonck, Marina Yee and Dirk van Saene. So how did this come about? Why are they even called the Antwerp Six? We will see that it was actually kind of an accident that this label came about, and what they had in common was that they all studied together at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Antwerp, and I would even dare to say that the label Antwerp Six today is a bit more known or more famous than some of the individual designers' names. Before I start my video, just very quickly, this is a non-sponsored video. I'm just sharing my personal opinion and my research here. Everything I say is alleged and for entertainment purposes only. All paths actually connect at a very famous shoe boutique in Antwerp called Cocodrillo. I really love that name. In 1983, it was founded by Gerd Brulot and Eddy Michiels. I hope I said the names correctly. And for some reasons, all the designers had some kind of connection to this boutique. For example, Demeulemeester frequently shopped there. And Brulot is very often credited as the source of encouragement for these designers to actually go to London. And that's exactly what they did. They used the opportunity. There was the British designer show in Olympia in 1986, and they packed some designs in their van and headed to London. But actually it was not all the 6 designers. Demeulemeester was physically missing, we have to say, because she was pregnant at the time. So now you have to imagine we're talking here about 6 young designers, so I assume the budget was very limited and they decided to pool their resources. And it is said that Marina Yee then designed a flyer that said, "Come see the 6 Belgian designers," and then below that you had the names of these 6 people. We are not really sure who actually came up with the Antwerp Six. Some people say it was the press because they had issues with saying the names correctly. So whoever it was, I think that's kind of a mystery that we can't 100% solve. But the fact is, after this show, a lot of people noticed them and people remembered them as the Antwerp Six. And one fun fact, Margiela is actually not officially part of the Antwerp Six. So some of you might now say, oh, he's Belgian. Yes, he is. And the reason why he was not part of that group in London was that he had already accepted a job offer in Paris. Since 1984, he had already been working for Jean-Paul Gaultier. So he was obviously busy, but until today, he's kind of like an honorary member because some people say with Margiela, it's Antwerp 6+1. And before I dive into the historical context, I would like to give you a recommendation for quite an interesting account that I discovered kind of by chance. The TikTok account is called Gerrit, Gerrit. I'm going to link it in the notes below. And in this account, you can learn more about Belgian fashion designers. It's really, really interesting. So I highly recommend that you follow this account on TikTok. So the Antwerp Six started in a time that was actually quite turbulent, we could say, when we look back, because at the end of the 80s, we had Reagan in the US, Margaret Thatcher and her iron fist in the UK. The Soviet Union was about to collapse, but nobody really had this on their radar yet, unless you were an expert, of course. There was HIV/AIDS, and despite an increase in prosperity in many countries, there was also social unrest. When I think about certain periods in history, I always ask myself, how was this reflected in fashion? Of course, we can say fashion is something superficial, it's just consumerism, which to a big extent fashion is. But there's also this dimension of fashion that we can learn something about history, about society through fashion. And I found this very interesting quote by Hendrik Opdebeck of the famous boutique Style in Brussels. And he said, I'm not giving you the complete quote here, I will put it on the website, but he said something along the lines that at the time when the Antwerp Six came about, there was a lot of negativity and people wanted to fight that negativity through fashion also. They wanted to create their own world, and this made me think, because basically they tried to escape reality by fashion. And then I thought, maybe if we look into the future and then people might look back at times like today or let's say early 2000s, maybe what was considered ridiculous at the time will then be understood as a fight against negativity. I don't know. Maybe this is a very optimistic view, but maybe this is exactly what's happening today, that these kind of ridiculous designs will be seen in the future as something that let us escape from reality. I don't know. Maybe you let me know what you think in the comments below. Now let's look to London. Why London? Even though we talk about the Antwerp Six, because we need to understand what was going on over there. So London at the time was basically underground subculture, and this was also very much reflected in fashion. So there were graduates by Central St. Martin's, the Royal Academy of Arts, and they also showed this movement, this subculture movement in fashion. So for the longest time, the capital of fashion had been Paris. But as I mentioned also in my video about the history of Fashion Week, we know now that Paris, yes, was still important, but London established itself more and more as a fashion hub. It probably also started in the swinging 60s and then moved along, but it became more and more interesting for people, and I would say especially young people, exactly because of that subculture, because I imagine young designers could not really express themselves in a fashion capital like Paris, which was very established. We know they came up with the rules for haute couture, all of that stuff. So they were probably rather drawn to London. And London was really smart at the time because they somehow realized this and moved more into this whole fashion development. And this was also the time where London Fashion Week was established and then became kind of an institution as well. And now let's move back across the canal and let's go to Antwerp. Because I don't know about you, but when I think about Antwerp, yes, now I think about fashion, but it's probably not the first thing that comes to mind. For some people, it's maybe shipping. For others, it's, if we're lucky, the diamonds now. But fashion, I would say, is more a recent phenomenon. But we should not be deceived by that, because actually Antwerp had a very, very long history of linen, textile production. But Antwerp knew that they can't just sit on these laurels of an old industry, because this industry was struggling, of course. So the then Minister of Economics came up with the idea of the textile plan, and he joined forces with the Institute of Fashion and Textiles in Belgium, and together they came up with the Golden Spindle competition. And this was basically a chance for young designers to be matched with industry players from the textile industry, we could say. And the designers of the Antwerp Six actually won this competition, and we already see that Antwerp did a lot of very important groundwork so that these young designers could actually go to London and present their work. So it was very, very important that there was this textile plan and also the financial support of these young designers. So today when I hear we don't need subsidies, competition and all of this for art or fashion, I always say, like, look, certain things can't be done without the support of the government. And in the case of Antwerp, this was actually a very smart move, because it established a city, a port city. Let's be honest, very often these port cities are not the most attractive cities. So yes, they have Rubens, so people travel there to experience that, but they actually opened up this new avenue, and then they added fashion to their portfolio, which until today I think is a huge pull factor for the city. Because think about it, how many designers have also graduated from Antwerp? So there was definitely some long-term thinking behind this textile plan. So why were the Antwerp Six then so successful? Because let's be honest, it can't just be the textile plan and then one show in London. The reason was that they definitely responded to the zeitgeist, and this is also what Sonia Noël, the founder of Steel, the boutique in Brussels, said in an interview. She said that at the time, in Belgium, there were French designers, Italian designers and Japanese designers available, but somehow the locals wanted something different, and what they wanted was the so-called 9-to-9 dressing. So when we go back to the 1980s, late 1980s, we think of Claude Montana, we also think of Thierry Mugler, so very exaggerated, very feminine but powerful feminine lines. And the Belgian fashion aficionados for sure appreciated that, but let's be honest, we also need something that's a bit more practical. And what people wanted at the time with this 9-to-9 dressing was that they could go to work in the same clothes as they wore for after work drinks or a dinner, for example. So we could say that the Antwerp Six were probably a bit more realistic, maybe a bit more down to earth for people what they wanted to wear. And if we think London had a subculture, Antwerp also had its own subculture. For example, in the Café d'Anvers, the party people came together. There were parties in warehouses. It was just a very happening time, and young people then also wanted fashion for exactly that. So we could say that it started from this like subculture also, and then it became kind of a mainstream movement, and the Antwerp Six reflected exactly that. To me, it's very interesting that we have these 6 designers, or 7 if we include Martin and Margiela, and they all are lumped together in this group, but they actually had their individual careers, and I would say some have become a bit more famous than the others. And then also when we look into the designers, they actually pursued different paths. So I would say probably the most famous of the Antwerp Six is Dries Van Noten. With his many collections, I find him particularly interesting because of his sources of inspiration. For example, he took a lot of elements also from India, and he only recently sold his namesake label to the Spanish group Puig, and for a short period of time now, Julian Klausner took over as the creative director. Also, Demeulemeester sold her namesake label. In her case, it was the Antonioli Holding Group. And one designer who I find particularly interesting in this case is Walter von Beirendonck, because I don't think this is a mainstream name like Dries Van Noten or Demeulemeester to, let's say, 90% of people. But he actually did quite a lot. So first of all, very soon he started teaching at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts until 2022. He was also a director there. He founded several labels, and he also did stage costumes, and amongst others he did the stage costumes for U2. Dirk Bikkembergs followed a slightly different path. He moved more into casual wear, sportswear. You probably know the sneakers with the label on it. And then Dirk van Saene actually moved away from fashion. He became a ceramic artist, and also Marina Yee, up until her death, fairly recent death, she occupied herself with stage costumes. And I wanted to keep this video quite short, because otherwise we can talk about all of these designers for a very long time, and I think that would be a bit too much for one video. But if you want me to do a deep dive into the CVs or special characteristics or design aesthetics of these Antwerp 6 or 6+1, then let me know in the comments below and I will prepare another video. And one other thing that might be interesting for everyone who wants to learn more about these Antwerp 6, there is an exhibition at the moment at the MoMu in Antwerp dedicated to the Antwerp 6, because it's 40 years of the Antwerp 6. And you will get to see 80 silhouettes of the designers. And what I personally find interesting is how involved these designers were when it came to the planning and curation of this whole exhibition. They gave access to their archives, in-depth interviews. And what was really interesting, in my opinion, was that the first thing that the curators did was to invite the designers and let them share their memories, like maybe a bit of nostalgia. And according to Kat Debo, I hope I said the name correctly, the curator of the MoMu, it was particularly emotional for them now, considering the passing of Marina Yee. This exhibition starts on 28th of March, and you have quite some time because it goes until the beginning of 2027. So if you need a reason to travel to Belgium, particularly Antwerp this year, I think this is quite a good one. And let me know in the comments if you plan to go there and what you think about the Antwerp 6. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to do 2 things that really help us creators. The first one is like this video, and please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. If you prefer to read about fashion, I have a lot of articles on my website, thepinklookbook.com, and if you have time, you can also check out my fashion label Pelagona. And if you enjoyed this overview of the Antwerp 6, I have another video which might be very interesting for you. Thank you very much for joining me in this video, and see you in the next one.